What if I told you a Meat Locker recording session created one of rock's most explosive debuts, born from a drummer fooling around on the final day? A kid from the steel mills escaped through a $40 guitar and conquered stadiums faster than his own solo career. Then he did the impossible, replaced rock's biggest frontman, and made the band even bigger. 4 #1 albums later, a Father's Day phone call erased everything. This is the rise and fall of Sammy Hagar. Fontana, California, mid-1960s. If you grew up there, your future was already written. Graduate high school, walk through the gates of Kaiser Steel Mill, one of the first steel plants west of the Mississippi, and spend the next 40 years in the open hearth. That was the deal. That was the only deal. Samuel Roy Hagar understood this trajectory with brutal clarity. His family had moved between lettuce labor camps and 9 different homes before settling in Fontana. His father, Bobby Hagar, worked the mill but carried the scars of a different dream, a boxing career that ended with a record nobody wanted, knocked down 20 times in a single fight. The old man became a madman and an alcoholic. Sammy's mother, Gladys, sometimes had to take the children to sleep in the family car. This wasn't a childhood designed to produce rock stars. This was survival training. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. But something changed when Sammy got his hands on a $40 Sears catalog guitar. He'd been delivering newspapers and mowing lawns, saving every penny, driven by a sound he couldn't shake. The Rolling Stones, Dick Dale's surf rock fury. The raw energy bleeding through transistor radios and local armory shows. Music wasn't a hobby. It was an escape hatch from the gravity of the steel mill. His first bands were exactly what you'd expect from a Fontana kid, garage outfits with names nobody remembers, playing covers in dive bars and backyard parties. But the voice was already there, that unmistakable rasp, that blue-collar howl that sounded like it had been forged in the same fires that melted steel. Sammy Hagar wasn't trying to be Robert Plant or Paul Rogers. He was trying to be louder than the mill, faster than the future waiting for him at Kaiser. And for the people who grew up in towns just like Fontana, places where the factory whistle dictated your entire life, Sammy's story was their story. He was one of us, a kid who looked at the predetermined path and said no, who grabbed a guitar instead of a lunch pail and bet everything on the belief that volume and determination could rewrite destiny. The dream was forming, but the breakthrough was still years away, waiting in a Meat Locker recording studio with a guitarist who would change everything. Everything pointed to Sammy Hagar remaining a regional hard rock journeyman, grinding through clubs and opening slots, chasing a hit that would never come. Then Ronnie Montrose called. Ronnie Montrose was a session guitarist who'd played for Van Morrison and Edgar Winter. He had a vision: create the heaviest, rawest American hard rock band imaginable. No psychedelic remnants, no folk pretensions, just pure, uncut power. When he saw Sammy perform, he recognized the missing piece, a Robert Plant-esque frontman with the lung capacity and raw aggression to match his guitar assault. In 1973, they entered a studio in Hollywood to record what would become their self-titled debut. Producer Ted Templeman was in the control room, and the studio itself was a meat locker, literally freezing, designed to keep the energy tense and immediate. The band, Montrose on guitar, Sammy on vocals, Denny Kermasi on drums, and Bill Church on bass, worked fast and furious. Then came the moment that would define them forever. It was the final day of rehearsals. The band was packing up, ready to call it done. Denny Kermasi started playing an iconic drum beat, just fooling around, killing time. Ronnie heard it, grabbed his guitar, and jumped in. The riff locked into the groove like a machine coming to life. Sammy, standing there with no plan and no lyrics, opened his mouth and improvised. Light, sweet, and sticky. Ted Templeman's voice exploded through the studio monitors. Keep the tape rolling. That spontaneous combustion became rock candy. And when Montrose dropped in 1973, it detonated. FM radio stations, those underground, free-form powerhouses that were redefining what rock could be, grabbed Rock Candy and Bad Motor Scooter and played them into the ground. For a generation that were cruising in muscle cars with 8 tracks blasting, Montrose was the sound of pure, uncomplicated American freedom. But the brotherhood was already fracturing. Ronnie Montrose was brilliant. But he was also deeply insecure. When a Belgian review called Sammy the second coming of Robert Plant, Ronnie's ego couldn't handle it. Tensions escalated. Creative clashes turned personal. By 1975, as the band was touring Europe in a cramped station wagon, Ronnie fired Sammy. The official reason was musical differences. The real reason? Ronnie couldn't stand sharing the spotlight with a frontman who was becoming bigger than the band. For those listening who first heard Montrose blasting from their FM dials in 1974, this era is ground zero nostalgia. The irony is almost too perfect. While the band was disintegrating in a Paris hotel room, they were creating music that would outlast almost everything else from that year. Sammy Hagar was out of a job, but he wasn't done, not even close. Post-Montrose, Sammy faced the brutal reality of starting over. No band name to lean on, no safety net, just a voice, a work ethic forged in steel towns, and an unshakable belief that he could build something bigger on his own terms. Throughout the late 1970s, Sammy Hagar became a road warrior. He played tertiary markets, small towns and secondary cities that bigger acts ignored, places like Boise, Spokane, and Wichita. He toured with rotating bands and developed a simple philosophy: throw a huge party on stage every night and invite the whole crowd. The Red Rocker identity was born in the most unlikely place: a $1 Rising Stars concert in Seattle in 1977. Sammy walked on stage wearing all red. Red pants, red shirt, red everything. A local journalist took one look and started calling him the Red Rocker. The name stuck. It wasn't calculated marketing, it was pure accident. But it became the brand that would define him for the next 50 years. By 1982, Sammy signed with another record deal and released Standing Hampton. The album went platinum, validating years of relentless touring. But the real anthem came 2 years later with I Can't Drive 55. The song was born from pure frustration. Sammy was driving an Avis rental car back from an African safari when he got pulled over for doing 62 miles per hour. As the officer was writing the ticket, Sammy was already writing the lyrics in his head. The song became a generational battle cry, a middle finger to speed limits, authority, and anyone trying to slow you down. For the audience who remembers cassette tapes blasting from truck stereos and the freedom of empty highways, I Can't Drive 55 was more than a song. It was a lifestyle. And Sammy embodied that lifestyle completely. His first rock star car? A French Citroën 2CV, which he thought had class despite looking like a sardine can on wheels. But the sentiment was pure Sammy. Do it your way, even if it makes no sense to anyone else. By the mid-1980s, Sammy Hagar had become a Coliseum-filling solo artist. He didn't have a hit single for nearly a decade, yet he was selling out arenas coast to coast. He was the underdog who refused to go away, the blue-collar hero who built an empire one sweaty club at a time. But everything was about to change, because the world's biggest rock band was about to lose their frontman. And they were looking for someone professional, talented, and willing to take the hardest job in rock and roll. Early 1985, David Lee Roth walked away from Van Halen. The split was messy, public, and seemingly catastrophic. Van Halen was the biggest band on the planet. How do you replace that kind of charisma, that kind of showmanship? Most people assumed the band was finished. Then Eddie Van Halen and Sammy Hagar bonded over Ferraris. Eddie had seen Sammy perform and respected his work ethic. Unlike Roth, Sammy was a musician first. He could sing, write, and contribute ideas without turning every session into a power struggle. Eddie invited Sammy to his home studio, which Sammy later described as a mess that stunk like a bar that hadn't been cleaned for 100 years. But within minutes of jamming together, something clicked. Sammy improvised lyrics to what would become Summer Nights. And Eddie's father, Jan Van Halen, marveled at Sammy's ability to scat like a jazz singer. The chemistry was undeniable. What happened next defied every prediction. The Van Hagar era didn't just survive, it dominated. 4 consecutive #1 albums. The band's sound shifted toward melody and sophistication without losing the hard rock edge. Eddie could finally experiment with keyboards. Sammy could showcase his vocal range. They became a professional, cohesive machine. This was the miracle in rock and roll. A replacement singer didn't just maintain the band's legacy, he elevated it. Sammy brought discipline, musicianship, and a collaborative spirit that allowed Van Halen to evolve instead of implode. But here's the irony that Sammy himself recognized. During the first rehearsal, he asked Eddie about tour finances. "How much did you net on the last tour?" Eddie told him. Sammy did the math and realized he was making 3 times more money as a solo artist than any individual member of Van Halen. He didn't need Van Halen, but he believed in the music, and that belief carried them to the top of the world. Despite the sold-out stadiums and platinum records, the Van Halen machine was quietly deteriorating from the inside. The fracture began with the arrival of manager Ray Daniels, a figure Sammy would later describe as a cunning snake, who favored the Van Halen brothers over a democratic band structure. Creative clashes intensified. Sammy was pressured to record songs for the Twister soundtrack, despite his wife's difficult pregnancy and his own exhaustion. He felt the band was being mismanaged, that producers were rewriting his lyrics behind his back, and that the brothers were consolidating power in ways that excluded him. The breaking point came over a greatest hits package. The label wanted to release one. Eddie pushed for it. Sammy resisted, arguing they should focus on new material instead of repackaging the past. The disagreement became personal, toxic, irreconcilable. Then came Father's Day, 1996. Sammy was at home, celebrating with his family, when the phone rang. It was Eddie Van Halen. The conversation was brief and brutal. Eddie told Sammy he always just wanted to be a solo artist and that the band was moving in a different direction. Sammy remembers he flew out of bed like I'd seen a ghost. A few words went back and forth. And just like that, after a decade of dominance, Sammy Hagar was out. The betrayal cut deep. Not because he needed Van Halen financially, he didn't, but because he'd given everything to make the band work. He'd been the professional, the peacemaker, the guy who showed up on time and delivered every night. And in return, he was erased, pushed out, replaced by the old guy they'd walked away from a decade earlier. For the fans who had followed the band, who understood the pain of loyalty unrewarded, this moment resonated profoundly. How do you give a decade of your life to a project and still lose your place? How do you watch the very people you lifted to new heights turn around and shut you out? The answer for Sammy Hagar was simple. You don't spiral, you pivot. Sammy Hagar's response to being shut out wasn't bitterness. It was a masterclass in entrepreneurial reinvention. He'd already been building something in parallel, a small cantina in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, called Cabo Wabo. What started as a vacation retreat became a brand, and that brand became an empire. Sammy founded Cabo Wabo Tequila in the early 1990s, serving a small batch, 100% agave recipe he discovered in the town of Tequila. He didn't know the spirits business. He didn't have a distribution plan. He just had passion and a belief that there was a better way to do things. In 2007, he sold an 80% stake in the company for $80 million. Think about that. The guy who got fired from Van Halen became a tequila tycoon. Musically, he returned to his roots with the Wabaritas, then formed the supergroup Chickenfoot, and eventually, The Circle, a band that continues to play today. He didn't chase radio hits or beg for label support. He built his own ecosystem where the fans were the foundation and the music was the mission. Reflecting on his tequila success, Sammy noted, "You don't have to know what you are doing to be successful. Sometimes passion, wanting something different, and breaking the rules is the shortest route." And the cars? He never stopped. Recently, he purchased a 1,000 horsepower LaFerrari for $1.3 million. At 77 years old, he still can't drive 55. For the loyal followers of Sammy Hagar, this chapter is the ultimate vindication. Sammy didn't just survive the fall, he won. He became wealthier, happier, and more independent than he ever was in Van Halen. He beat the toxic band environment and came out on top. And he did it without compromising his joy or his integrity. Today, Sammy Hagar stands as one of rock's great survivors. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2007 as a member of Van Halen, a bittersweet honor given that he's been largely erased from some recent band memoirs. But the data doesn't lie. 4 #1 albums, decades of sold-out tours, a tequila empire, and a fan base that never wavered. His philosophy remains rooted in the lessons of Fontana. Keep your finger on where you started, and don't ever lose sight of that. Family over fame and fortune. Even at 77, Sammy claims he's functional and having as much fun as he did at 30. He hosts annual birthday bash concerts in Cabo, where thousands of fans gather not just for the music, but for the community he built. He's not a nostalgia act trotting out hits for rent money. He's a man who continues to live the Red Rocker philosophy every single day. For the generation that watched him evolve from Montrose to solo stardom, to Van Halen dominance, to entrepreneurial triumph, Sammy Hagar represents the enduring power of authenticity. He never pretended to be something he wasn't. He never lost the blue-collar grit that made him relatable. And he never stopped driving fast, playing loud, and throwing the biggest party he could. The final reflection. What does winning actually look like? Is it being the original guy in the band? Or is it the guy who owns the cantina, drives the Ferrari, and still rocks arenas at 77? Sammy Hagar answered that question definitively. He didn't just outlast the industry. He outlasted the grudges, the toxicity, and the drama. He built his own island and invited the whole world to the party. And somewhere in Fontana, a kid with a $40 guitar is looking up at the sky and realizing that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to end up in the steel mill after all. Sammy Hagar proved that the loudest engines burn the hottest, and sometimes they burn forever. From Montrose's raw power to the Red Rocker grind to Van Halen stadium dominance, he conquered every era on his own terms. The shutout stung, but survival without surrender became his greatest triumph. What's your favorite Sammy Hagar era? Montrose, the Red Rocker, or Van Halen? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of rock's greatest survivors.